A lot of men have sex with other men but don't identify as gay or bisexual. A subset of these men who have sex with men, or MSM, live lives that are, in all respects other than their occasional homosexual encounters, quite straight and traditionally masculine. They have wives and families, they embrace various masculine norms, and so on. They are able to, in effect, compartmentalize an aspect of the sex lives in a way that prevents it from blurring into or complicating the more public identities. Sociologists are quite interested in this phenomenon because it can tell us a lot about how humans interpret thorny questions of identity and sexual desire and cultural expectations. Last year, NYU Press published the fascinating book Not Gay: Sex Between Straight White Men by the University of California, Riverside, Gender and Sexuality Professor Jane Ward. In it, Ward explored various subcultures in which what could be called straight homosexual sex abounds, not just in the ones you'd expect, like the military and fraternities, but also biker gangs and conservative suburban neighborhoods, to better understand how the participants in these encounters experienced and explained their attractions, identities, and rendezvous. But not all straight MSM have gotten the same level of research attention. One relatively neglected such group, argues the University of Oregon sociology doctoral student Tony Silver in a new paper in Gender and Society, is rural, white, straight men well neglected if you set aside Brokeback Mountain. Silver sought to find out more about these men, so he recruited 19 from Men for Men casual encounters boards on Craigslist and interviewed them for about an hour and a half each about the sexual habits, lives, and senses of identity. All were from rural areas of Missouri, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, or Idaho, places known for their social conservatism and predominant white populations. The sample skewed a bit on the older side, with 14 of the 19 men in their 50s or older, and most identified exclusively or mostly straight, with a few responses along the lines of straight but bi, but more straight. Since this is a qualitative rather than a quantitative study, it's important to recognize that the particular men recruited by Silver weren't necessarily representative of, well, anything. These were just the guys who agreed to participate in an academic's research project after they saw an ad for it on Craigslist. But the point of Silver's project was less to draw any sweeping conclusions about either this subset of straight MSM, or the population as a whole, than to listen to the stories and compare them to the narratives uncovered by Ward and various other researchers. Specifically, Silver was trying to understand better the interplay between normative rural masculinity, the set of mores and norms that defines what it means to be a rural man, and these men's sexual encounters. In doing so, he introduces a really interesting and catchy concept, bud sex. Ward, 2015, examines dude sex, a type of male-on-male sex that white, masculine, straight men in urban and military contexts frame as a way to bond and build masculinity with other similar brothers. Carrillo and Hoffman, 2016, referred to the primarily urban participants as heteroflexible, given that they were exclusively or primarily attracted to women. While the participants in this study share overlap with those groups, they also frame their same-sex sex in subtly different ways. Not as an opportunity to bond with urban brothers, and only sometimes but not always as a novel sexual pursuit, given that they had sexual attractions all across the spectrum. Instead, as Silver, forthcoming, explores, the participants reinforced the straightness through unconventional interpretations of same-sex sex as helping a buddy out, relieving urges, acting on sexual desires for men without sexual attractions to them, relieving general sexual needs, and/or a way to act on sexual attractions. Bud sex captures these interpretations, as well as how the participants had sex and with whom they partnered. The specific type of sex the participants had with other men, bud sex, cemented the rural masculinity and heterosexuality, and distinguishes them from other MSM. This idea of homosexual sex cementing heterosexuality and traditional Rural masculinity certainly feels counterintuitive, but it clicks a little once you read some of the specific findings from Silver's interviews. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that rural masculinity is central to the men's self-understanding. Quoting another researcher, Silver notes that it guides their thoughts, tastes, and practices. It provides them with the fundamental sense of self, it structures how they understand the world around them, and it influences how they codify sameness and difference. As with just about all GHTMSM, there's a tension at work. How can these men do what they're doing without it threatening parts of their identity that feel vital to who they are? In some of the subcultures Ward studied, straight MSM were able to reinterpret homosexual identity as actually strengthening the heterosexual identities. So it was with Silver's subjects as well. They found ways to cast the homosexual liaisons as reaffirming their rural masculinity. One way they did so was by seeking out partners who were similar to them. This is a key element of bud sex, writes Silver. Partnering with other men similarly privileged on several intersecting axes, gender, race, and sexual identity, allowed the participants to normalize and authenticate the sexual experiences as normatively masculine. In other words, if you, a straight guy from the country, once in a while have sex with other straight guys from the country, it doesn't threaten your straight, rural identity as much as it would if instead you, for example, traveled to the nearest major metro area and tried to pick up dudes at a gay bar. You're not the sort of man who would go to a gay bar, you're not gay. It's difficult here not to slip into the old middle school joke of it's not gay if your eyes are closed, or the lights are off, or you're best friends, but that's actually what the men in Silver's study did, in a sense. As Kane, one of the interview subjects, said, "I'm really not drawn to what I would consider a really effeminate faggot type. Yes. But he does like the masculine-looking guy who maybe is more bi." Similarly, Matt, 60, explained, "If they're too flamboyant they just turn me off," and Jack noted, "Femininity in a man is a turn-off." Ryan, 60, explained, "I'm not comfortable around femme, and masculinity is what attracts me," while David shared that femme guys don't do anything for me at all. "In fact, actually, I don't care for em." John shared, "I don't really like flamin' queers." Mike, 50, similarly said, "I don't want the effeminate ones. I want the manly guys. If I wanted someone that acts girlish, I got a wife at home." Jeff, 38, prefers masculinity because, "I guess I perceive men who are feminine want to hang out, have companionship, and make it last 2 or 3 hours. In other words, it's not gay if the guy you're having sex with doesn't seem gay at all." Or consider the preferences of Marcus, another one of Silver's interview subjects. "A guy that I would consider more like me, that gets blowjobs from guys every once in a while, doesn't do it every day. I know that there are a lot of guys out there that are like me, the manly guys, and doing manly stuff, and just happen to have oral sex with men every once in a while." Chuckles. "So, that's why I kinda prefer those types of guys. It also seems that more masculine guys wouldn't harass me, I guess. Hound me all the time. Send me 1,000 emails. Hey, you want to get together today? Hey, what about now? And there is a thought in my head that a more feminine gay guy would want me to come around more. Straight guys, I think I identify with them more because that's kinda like how I feel myself. And bi guys, the same way. We can talk about women. There have been times where we've watched hetero porn before we got started or whatever, so I kinda prefer that. Opening square bracket. And because I'm not attracted, it's very off-putting when somebody acts gay, and I feel like a lot of gay guys just kinda put off the gay vibe, you'll call it, I guess, and that's very off-putting to me." This, of course, is similar to the way many straight men talk about women. It's nice to have them around and it's, of course, great to have sex with them, but the clingy Overall, it's just more fun to hang out around masculine guys who share your straight guy preferences and vocabulary, and who are less emotionally demanding. One way to interpret this is as defensiveness. Of course, these men aren't actually straight, but identify that way for a number of reasons, including internalized heterosexism, participation in other sex marriage and child-rearing, which could be complicated if they came out as bi or gay, and enjoyment of straight privilege and culture, writes Silver. After Jane Ward's book came out last year, Rich Juzwiak laid out a critique in Gawker that I also saw in many of the responses to my Q&A with her. While Ward sidestepped the question of her subject's actual sexual orientations, I am not concerned with whether the men I describe in this book are really straight or gay. She wrote, "It shall matter," as Juzwiak put it, given the cultural incentives that remain for a straight-seeming gay. Given the long road to self-acceptance that makes many feel incapable or fearful of honestly answering questions about identity, which would undoubtedly alter the often vague data that provide the basis. As for Ward's arguments, it seems that one should care about the wide canyon between what men claim they are and what they actually are. In other words, Ward sidestepped an important political and rights minefield by taking her subject's claims about the sexuality more or less at face value. There are certainly some good reasons for sociologists and others to not examine individuals' claims about their identities too critically. But still, Juzwiak's critique is important, and it looms large in the background of one particular segment of Silver's paper. Actually, it turned out, some of Silver's subjects really weren't all that opposed to a certain level of deeper engagement with the bud-sex buds. At least when it came to their regulars, or the men they hooked up with habitually. While relationships with regulars were free of romance and deep emotional ties, they were not necessarily devoid of feeling. Participants enjoyed regulars for multiple reasons: convenience, comfort, sexual compatibility, or even friendship. Pat described a typical meet-up with his regular. "We talk for an hour or so over coffee, then we'll go get a blowjob and then part our ways." Similarly, Richard noted, "Sex is a very small part of our relationship. It's more friends. We discuss politics, all sorts of shit." Likewise, with several of his regulars, Billy noted, "I go on road trips, drink beer, go down to the city to look at chicks, go out and eat, shoot pool. I got one friend I hike with. It normally leads to sex, but we go out and do activities other than we meet and suck." While Kevin noted that his regular relationship has no emotional connection at all, it also has a friendship-like quality, as evidenced by occasional visits and sleepovers despite almost 100 miles of distance. Similarly, David noted, "If my wife's gone for a weekend, I'll go to his place and spend a night or two with him. We obviously do things other than sex. So yeah, we go to dinner, go out and go shopping. Stuff like that." Jack explained that with his regular, we connected on Craigslist and became good friends. In addition to having sex, we just made a connection, but there was no love at all. Thus, bud sex is predicated on rejecting romantic attachment and deep emotional ties, but not all emotion. Whatever else is going on here, clearly these men are getting some companionship out of these relationships. It isn't just about sex if you make a point of getting coffee, and especially if you spend nights together, go shopping or out to dinner, and so on. But there are sturdy incentives in place for them to not take that step of identifying fully as gay or bi. Instead, they frame the bud sex, even when it's accompanied by other forms of intimacy, in a way that reinforces the rural, straight masculinity. It's important to note that this isn't some rational decision where the men sit down, list the pros and cons, and say, "Well, I guess coming out just won't maximize my happiness and well-being." It's more subtle than that, given the osmosis-like way we all absorb social norms and mores. In all likelihood, when Silver's subjects say they're straight, they mean it. That's how they feel. But it's hard not to get the sense that maybe some of them would be happier, or would have made different life decisions if they had had access to a different, less constricted vocabulary to describe what they want and who they are.